Captain Jake Morrison stared at the screen on his ship's bridge and felt his blood turn cold. The message from the outer colonies was clear, and it carried news that would change everything for humanity. The aliens were coming, and they were not like anything humans had ever faced before. These creatures called themselves the Vorthic Collective, and they did not come to trade or talk. They came to consume everything in their path. The U's Liberty moved through space toward Earth as fast as its engines could push it. Jake knew that every second counted now. The message he carried would shake the foundation of human civilization. In the cargo bay of his ship lay the body of a colonist who had somehow escaped from the Vorthak attack on New Haven. The man had died during the journey, but not before telling Jake what he had seen. Admiral Lisa Carter waited for Jake at Luna Command. She was one of the most respected military leaders in human space, and her face showed the stress of recent events. Reports had been coming in from the frontier worlds for weeks. Ships disappeared without trace and colonies went silent one by one. Now they finally knew why. Jake entered the briefing room where Earth's top military minds had gathered. The room fell quiet as he began to speak. He told them about New Haven and how it had been completely destroyed in just 3 hours. The Vorthak ships had appeared from nowhere and released something into the planet's atmosphere. Every living thing on the surface had simply stopped moving and then began walking toward the alien vessels. Dr. Sam Rodriguez had been studying the samples that Jake brought back. He was a xenobiologist who specialized in alien life forms, and his findings were more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The Vorthak were not just conquerors. They were parasites that fed on consciousness itself. When they took a world, they absorbed every thinking mind on it and added those minds to their collective. The doctor explained that the Vorthak had been doing this for millions of years across the galaxy. Each world they consumed made them stronger and smarter. They had the combined knowledge and experience of thousands of civilizations. No species had ever successfully fought them off because the Vorthak learned from every battle and adapted their tactics. Admiral Carter asked the question that everyone was thinking. How much time did humanity have before the Vorthak reached Earth? Dr. Rodriguez checked his calculations again and gave them the answer they dreaded. 6 months at most before the main fleet arrived. The advanced scouts were already probing human defenses and mapping their star systems. Commander Beth Williams was Earth's top military strategist, and she had been working on defense plans since the first reports came in. She stood up and activated a holographic display that showed the solar system. Traditional weapons would be useless against the Vorthak. Their bioships could regenerate damage and adapt to any attack. Humanity needed something completely new. The answer came from an unexpected source. 3 years earlier, human scientists had been experimenting with quantum entanglement technology. The project had been shelved after several accidents, but recent developments had made it viable again. The quantum weapons could attack targets across multiple dimensions at once. They bypassed normal defenses by hitting enemies in ways that physics said should be impossible. Dr. Patricia Lee led the quantum weapons program, and she explained how the technology worked. The weapons created tears in space and time that damaged anything caught in them. The problem was that operating the weapons required a human mind to guide them. The quantum energy had to be channeled through living consciousness to work properly. The cost of using quantum weapons was horrific. Every test had shown the same result. The human operator's brain would be completely destroyed by the quantum energy. They would die instantly as their consciousness was torn apart at the molecular level. It was a one-way trip with no hope of survival. President Alex Turner had the final decision to make. He looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders and saw his own fear reflected in their eyes. The choice was simple but terrible. They could wait for the Vorthak to arrive and watch humanity be absorbed into the collective. Or they could strike first using weapons that would kill their own people to operate. The president authorized the quantum weapons program and gave Admiral Carter permission to begin recruiting volunteers. They would need pilots brave enough to fly into battle knowing they would never return home. The ships would be modified to carry the quantum weapons and the volunteers would be trained to use them. Jake volunteered immediately along with hundreds of other military personnel. They understood what was being asked of them, and they accepted it without hesitation. Earth needed heroes who were willing to die to save their species. The Vorthak had never faced an enemy desperate enough to destroy themselves to win. The preparations began immediately as humanity raced against time to build an impossible weapon operated by the bravest people who had ever lived. The greatest. Victory in human history would come at a price that no one should ever have to pay. Dr. Patricia Lee worked 18 hours every day in the underground laboratories beneath Colorado Springs. The Quantum Weapons Project had become her entire world, and she barely slept anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the test pilots who had volunteered to die for humanity. The weight of their sacrifice pressed down on her like a physical thing. The neural interface technology was the key to making the quantum weapons work. Human consciousness had to be directly connected to the quantum field generators. The brain patterns of the operator would guide the weapons to their targets across impossible distances. But the process would burn out every neuron in the pilot's head within seconds. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan Phillips arrived at the facility with the first group of volunteer pilots. He was a career military officer who had served in 3 different wars. His record showed courage under fire and leadership that inspired others to follow him anywhere. When he learned about the quantum weapons program, he signed up without asking a single question about his chances of survival. Maria Santos was among the volunteers, and her story broke Dr. Lee's heart. She had been a test pilot for experimental aircraft before the Vorthak crisis began. Her husband and 2 children had been living on New Haven when the aliens attacked. She watched the colony die from space as her ship was too far away to help. Now she wanted revenge, and she did not care what it cost her. The training was brutal and dangerous. Each pilot had to learn to synchronize their brainwaves with quantum energy fields. The process caused intense pain, and several volunteers suffered seizures during the early sessions. Dr. Lee begged Admiral Carter to find another way, but time was running out. The Vorthak fleet was getting closer every day. Jake Morrison had been promoted to lead one of the pilot squadrons. He spent his days learning to operate quantum-enhanced fighters, while his nights were filled with dreams of the dead colonists from New Haven. The alien threat felt more real to him than anyone else because he had seen what the Vorthak could do. Every human they absorbed made the collective stronger and smarter. The quantum simulators showed what would happen when the weapons were actually used. The pilot's consciousness would expand across multiple dimensions as the quantum field activated. For just a moment, they would see reality from a completely different perspective. Then their brain would overload and shut down permanently. It was like watching someone commit suicide in slow motion. Dr. Rodriguez visited the training facility and watched the volunteers prepare for their mission. He tried to explain to them what they were facing, but the Vorthak were beyond normal human understanding. They were a hive mind that had consumed entire galaxies. Each individual alien was just a small part of something unimaginably vast and hungry. The pilots asked Dr. Rodriguez if there was any chance they could survive using the quantum weapons. He wanted to lie to them and give them hope, but he respected them too much for that. The truth was that every test had ended the same way. The human operator would die, and there was no technology that could prevent it. They were asking these brave people to sacrifice everything for a chance to hurt the enemy. Phillips gathered his squadron in the pilot-ready room and looked at the 24 men and women who had volunteered to die for Earth. They were the best humanity had to offer, and they were about to be thrown away like ammunition. He tried to find words that would make their sacrifice meaningful, but everything he thought of sounded empty and hollow. The quantum fighters were unlike anything that had ever been built before. They looked normal from the outside, but inside they contained technology that bent the laws of physics. The quantum field generators hummed with deadly energy that would kill anyone who got too close. The pilots would be protected by special shielding until the moment they activated their weapons. Maria Santos recorded a message for her dead family as she prepared for the mission. She told them that she would be joining them soon and that their Deaths would be avenged. The quantum weapons would tear through the Vorthak fleet like fire through paper. The aliens had never faced anything like what humanity was about to unleash on them. Dr. Lee made final adjustments to the neural interfaces as the launch time approached. She had done everything possible to protect the pilots, but she knew it was not enough. Each one of them would die horribly when they activated their weapons. Their consciousness would be scattered across dimensions and their bodies would become empty shells drifting in space. The Vorthak advanced scouts had been detected at the edge of the solar system. Long-range sensors showed massive bioships that pulsed with organic energy. They were unlike anything in human experience, and conventional weapons would bounce off their living armor. Only the quantum weapons had any hope of penetrating there. Defenses. Admiral Carter gave the final briefing to the quantum pilots on board the UES Defiance. She told them that humanity's survival depended on their mission. The Vorthak could not be reasoned with or negotiated with. They would consume every human mind on Earth unless they were stopped here and now. The pilots were the only thing standing. Between civilization and total extinction, Phillips led his squadron to their fighters as alarms sounded throughout the ship. The main Vorthak fleet was approaching and the battle would begin within hours. Each pilot climbed into their cockpit knowing they would never climb out again. They were flying toward certain death, but they did it willingly because Earth needed heroes. The quantum weapons came online as the fighters launched into space. Reality seemed to bend around them as the field generators activated. The pilots felt their minds expanding as they connected to forces beyond normal understanding. Soon, they would use these impossible weapons to strike at enemies who thought they were unstoppable. Humanity's greatest victory was about to begin. The Vorthak fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made real. Fleet Admiral Gary Stone watched from the bridge of the UES Constitution as hundreds of bioships materialized in the outer solar system. They were massive living creatures that moved through space with impossible grace. Their organic hulls pulsed with veins of energy and their surfaces rippled like breathing flesh. The alien ships defied everything humans knew about spacecraft design. They had no visible engines or weapons, but they moved faster than anything built by human hands. Long tentacles extended from their bodies and tasted the solar wind as they approached Earth's defensive positions. The largest vessel was the size of a small moon, and it radiated malevolence that could be felt across space. Ghost Squadron moved into attack position as conventional forces engaged the Vorthak advance guard. Phillips led his quantum fighters toward the enemy fleet, while behind him human battleships fired everything they had. Nuclear missiles and particle beams struck the alien bioships, but their living armor simply absorbed the damage and regenerated within minutes. The Vorthak command ship hung in space like a cancerous growth. It was ancient beyond measure and had absorbed the minds of countless civilizations. Inside its bio-neural core, the collective consciousness plotted humanity's destruction. They had faced many species over the millions of years, but none had ever surprised them. Humans would be just another meal for the eternal hunger. Phillips activated his quantum weapon as he approached the command ship. Reality around him began to fracture and bend as the field generator came online. He could feel his consciousness expanding across multiple dimensions, and for just a moment he saw the universe from a perspective that no human was meant to experience. The quantum energy flowed through his brain like liquid fire. The alien command ship screamed as the quantum weapon struck it. The sound came from no atmosphere, but somehow every human in the fleet could hear it. The bioship's living hull began to tear apart as quantum energy ripped through its dimensional structure. Pieces of organic matter scattered into space as the creature vessel died in agony. Phillips felt his mind beginning to dissolve as the quantum field consumed his consciousness. His last coherent thought was satisfaction at watching the enemy flagship die. His fighter drifted away from the battle as his body became an empty shell. The quantum weapon had done its job, but the cost was exactly what everyone had expected. Maria Santos targeted 3 Vorthak escort vessels as they moved to protect their damaged command ship. She activated her quantum weapon and felt reality twist around her as impossible energies flowed through the fighter systems. The alien ships were caught completely off guard as quantum tiers opened in their hulls. They had no defense against weapons that attacked across dimensions. The bioships tried to regenerate from the quantum damage, but the energy was eating away at their cellular structure faster than they could heal. Santos watched them die as her own brain burned out from the quantum feedback. Her final transmission was a whisper that barely reached the human fleet, but every pilot heard it clearly. She had avenged her family and struck a blow against humanity's greatest enemy. One by one, the quantum pilots sacrificed themselves as they tore through the Vorthek fleet. Each activation of the impossible weapon sent shockwaves through space and time. The aliens had never faced anything like this before, and their bioships began to retreat in confusion. Species that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years were running from a handful of human fighters. Dr. Rodriguez monitored the battle from a research vessel positioned safely behind the main fleet. His instruments detected massive distortions in local spacetime as the quantum weapons fired again and again. The energy signatures were unlike anything in recorded science, and they seemed to be having unexpected effects on the fabric of reality itself. The scientist tried to radio a warning to Admiral Stone, but his transmission was lost in the chaos of battle. The quantum weapons were doing more than just killing Vorthek bioships. They were creating tiers in space and time that were slowly spreading outward from each point of impact. The damage to reality might be permanent, and it was getting worse with each weapon fired. Jake Morrison led his squadron against a cluster of Vorthak hunter-killers that were trying to flank the human formation. These bioships were smaller but faster than the command vessels, and they moved like living predators through space. He activated his quantum weapon just as they began their attack run and watched reality come apart around him. The hunter-killers were destroyed instantly as quantum energy tore through their dimensional matrices. But Jake could feel something wrong happening to space itself. The weapon's energy was not dissipating like it should. Instead, it was creating a growing wound in the universe that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. His consciousness faded as he realized that humanity might have created something worse than the Vorthek. The remaining alien ships began to retreat as Ghost Squadron continued their suicidal assault. The bioships that had seemed invincible just hours before were fleeing from quantum weapons they could not understand or defend against. But their retreat came too late to save most of their fleet. Human pilots were dying one by one, but they were taking multiple enemies with each sacrifice. Admiral Stone watched the tactical display as the Vorthek fleet scattered and ran. Humanity had won the battle, but at a terrible cost. 24 of their bravest pilots were dead, and the quantum weapons had left scars on space itself that were still growing. The victory felt hollow as reports came in about dimensional distortions spreading throughout the battlefield. The last quantum pilot fired his weapon at the retreating Vorthek command vessels. The explosion that followed lit up the solar system, like a new star being born. When the energy faded, the alien ships were gone, but so was a significant chunk of local spacetime. A dark wound hung in the void where reality had been torn apart by forces too powerful for human minds to control. Dr. Rodriguez finally managed to get through to the fleet command with his warning about the spacetime damage. The quantum weapons had saved humanity from the Vorthek, but they had also created a new threat that might be even worse. The tiers in reality were expanding, and no one knew how to stop them. Humanity's greatest victory was already turning into their greatest mistake. The victory celebration on Earth lasted exactly 3 days before the first colony reported strange readings in local space. Dr. Patricia Lee stared at the data streaming in from the outer settlements and felt her stomach drop. The quantum weapon residue was not dissipating as predicted. Instead, it was growing stronger and spreading like an infection through the fabric of reality itself. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of Luna Base watching evacuation ships launch toward the threatened colonies. His promotion had come with the bitter knowledge that his survival meant nothing if humanity was about to destroy itself. The quantum tiers were expanding along predictable paths that followed the neural patterns of the dead pilots. Somehow their consciousness was still affecting reality from beyond death, Lieutenant. Commander Kate Johnson worked around the clock analyzing the space-time distortions. She was Morrison's new science officer, and her background in theoretical physics made her the best hope for understanding what was happening. The quantum energy signatures were unlike anything in recorded science, but they showed clear signs of intelligent direction. Something was guiding the expansion of the tiers. President Turner faced the most difficult decision in human history as reports came in from across the colonies. Entire star systems would have to be abandoned to prevent the quantum decay from reaching populated worlds. The evacuation fleets were already overwhelmed, and millions of people would be left behind. The victory against the Vorthak had saved humanity only to condemn them to a slower, but equally certain destruction. General Paul Mitchell coordinated the largest evacuation in human history from his headquarters on Mars. Thousands of ships moved through space carrying refugees from the doomed colonies. The quantum tiers were spreading faster than anyone had predicted, and whole worlds were being swallowed by expanding wounds in reality. The refugees told stories of space itself coming apart around them. Dr. Sam Rodriguez made his breakthrough while studying Vorthak technology salvaged from the battlefield. The aliens had faced quantum weapons before during their millions of years of conquest. Hidden in their bioship databases were records of other species that had tried to use similar technology. Every one of those civilizations had destroyed themselves in exactly the same way. Humanity was destroying itself now. The Vorthak had developed a method to seal space-time fractures, but the cost was horrific beyond imagination. The process required massive quantities of conscious beings to be fed into the quantum tiers. Living minds had to be sacrificed to repair the damage to reality. It was exactly what the Vorthak had been collecting across the galaxy for millions of years. They were not just feeding on civilizations. They were cleaning up the mess left behind by desperate species trying to fight them. Rodriguez realized that humanity had become exactly what they had been fighting against. The quantum weapons had turned them into the same kind of monsters the Vorthak were. They had saved Earth only to discover that victory required them to sacrifice countless innocent lives to repair the damage they had caused. The irony was almost too bitter to accept. Admiral Morrison received the report about the Vorthak solution and felt something break inside his chest. The choice was simple but impossible. They could feed millions of people into the quantum tiers to seal them, or they could watch all of human space collapse into dimensional chaos. Either way, humanity would be destroyed, but one option would at least save Earth itself. Dr. Lee refused to accept that mass sacrifice was the only answer. She gathered a team of the best scientists in human space and began working on alternatives to the Vorthak method. There had to be another way to seal the quantum tiers without feeding living minds into them. The technology existed somewhere in human knowledge. They just had to find it before the expanding wounds reached Earth. Captain Susan Davis volunteered to lead an expedition into the largest quantum tier to study it from the inside. Her ship, the UES Explorer, was modified with experimental shielding that might protect the crew from dimensional distortions. The mission was incredibly dangerous, but it offered the only hope of understanding what was really happening inside the tiers. Davis and her crew entered the quantum fracture and immediately knew they had made a terrible mistake. Inside the tier was not empty space, but a nightmare realm where the laws of physics had completely broken down. Worse than that were the voices they could hear screaming across multiple dimensions. The consciousness of the dead quantum pilots was trapped inside the tiers, and they were in constant agony. Phillips was there along with Santos and all the other heroes who had sacrificed themselves to save humanity. Their minds had been shattered across dimensional barriers, but they were still aware and still suffering. They had become prisoners of their own heroism, unable to rest, while the tiers they had created threatened the species they had died to protect. The Explorer barely escaped from the quantum tier before its shielding failed completely. Davis transmitted Her findings back to Earth, and the horrible truth became clear. The quantum weapons had not just killed the pilots. They had trapped their consciousness in a state of eternal torment where they experienced death over and over again. Their pain was feeding the expansion of the tiers and making them grow stronger. Dr. Rodriguez realized that the Vortex solution would not work for humanity. The aliens could sacrifice random victims to seal quantum tiers, but humans would have to use the specific consciousness patterns that had created the damage. They would have to somehow rescue the trapped pilots and guide them to peace. It was the only way to stop the tiers from expanding further. President Turner authorized a desperate rescue mission using modified Vortex technology. The process was completely untested and might kill everyone involved, but it was better than watching humanity slowly tear itself apart. Dr. Lee worked frantically to adapt alien biotech for human use while Admiral Morrison assembled a new volunteer force. The volunteers would not be flying to their deaths this time. Instead, they would be entering the quantum realm to bring their fallen comrades home. It was just as dangerous as the original mission, but it offered hope instead of certain doom. Humanity had learned that sometimes the greatest victory required not just sacrifice but also redemption. Commander Johnson prepared to lead the rescue mission as reports came in about quantum tiers reaching the inner colonies. Time was running out, and the window for saving humanity was closing fast. The choice was no longer between victory and defeat, but between salvation and damnation for an entire species. The debate in the Global Assembly chamber grew more heated with each passing hour as the quantum tiers continued their relentless expansion toward Earth. Admiral Carter stood at the podium defending her position that humanity should implement the Vortex solution immediately. The alien technology was proven and effective even if it required the sacrifice of millions of volunteers. Waiting for another option might doom the entire species. Dr. Lee spoke passionately against the mass sacrifice proposal. She insisted that there had to be another way to seal the quantum tiers without feeding human consciousness into them. Her team had been working around the clock to modify the Vortex technology, and they were making progress. Given more time, they could find a solution that did not require turning humanity into the same monsters they had defeated. President Turner listened to both sides while reports streamed in from the outer colonies. 3 more star systems had been evacuated as the quantum tiers consumed everything in their path. The refugees spoke of watching space itself unravel as reality came apart around them. Ships that got too close to the tiers simply vanished as if they had never existed at all. Commander Johnson prepared her modified ship for the rescue mission while the politicians argued about humanity's future. The used Defender had been equipped with experimental Vortex biotechnology that should protect her crew from the dimensional distortions inside the quantum tiers. The process was untested and dangerous, but it offered hope of reaching the trapped pilots without adding more victims to their number. The consciousness of Phillips and his squadron remained trapped inside the quantum tiers, experiencing eternal torment. Their minds relived the moment of their sacrifice over and over again as dimensional energy tore through their neural patterns. They were aware of what was happening to humanity, but they could not break free from the quantum prison that held them. Their heroism had become a curse that threatened everything they had died to protect. Dr. Rodriguez worked frantically to complete the modifications to the Vortex rescue technology. The alien biocomputers were incredibly complex, and adapting them for human use required skills that pushed the boundaries of current science. Every hour of delay meant more colonies would be lost to the expanding tiers, but rushing the process could doom the rescue mission before it started. Maria Santos existed in a state of pure agony as her fragmented consciousness drifted through multiple dimensions. She could see her dead family calling to her from across the quantum void, but she could not reach them. Instead, she was trapped in an endless loop of activation and death as her quantum weapon fired again and again. The rescue mission was her only hope of escape from this technological hell. Admiral Morrison coordinated the evacuation efforts while keeping one eye on the rescue mission preparations. Millions of refugees were streaming toward Earth as the outer colonies fell to the quantum tiers. The evacuation ships were overcrowded and supplies were running short, but they had to keep moving people away from the expanding zones of dimensional chaos. Captain Davis reported strange readings from inside the largest quantum tier as her monitoring probes transmitted data from the dimensional fracture. The space inside the tiers was not empty, but filled with the echoes of consciousness from the trapped pilots. Their pain and confusion was somehow feeding the expansion process and making the tiers grow stronger with each passing day. The Global Assembly finally voted to authorize the rescue mission while keeping the Vortex sacrifice option as a backup plan. Dr. Lee would have one chance to save the trapped pilots and seal the quantum tiers without mass casualties. If her modified technology failed, then President Turner would implement the alien solution and sacrifice millions of volunteers to save Earth itself. Johnson led her team through final preparations as the launch window approached. Her crew included specialists in quantum physics and xenobiology, along with volunteers who understood they might not return from the mission. They would be entering a realm where the normal laws of reality had completely broken down and anything could happen. The Defender launched toward the nearest quantum tier as alarms sounded throughout human space. Long-range sensors had detected something impossible moving through the dimensional fractures. The consciousness of the trapped pilots was beginning to merge into a single entity that existed across multiple realities. If they could not be rescued, soon they might become something far worse than the Vorthak had ever been. Dr. Lee monitored the mission from her laboratory while making last-minute adjustments to the rescue technology. The biocomputers showed stable readings, but she knew that nothing about this mission was truly predictable. They were attempting something that had never been tried before, using alien technology that humanity barely understood. The quantum tiers had reached the middle colonies and panic was spreading through the remaining settlements. People could see the wounds in space with their own eyes as reality came apart around them. Ships tried to flee, but some were caught by the expanding dimensional chaos and simply ceased to exist. The tiers were accelerating and Earth itself would be threatened. Within weeks, Phillips felt a spark of hope as his fragmented consciousness detected the approaching rescue ship. For the first time since his sacrifice, he could sense something from the normal universe breaking through the quantum prison. Johnson and her crew were coming to bring him and his squadron home, but the process would be incredibly dangerous for everyone involved. The Defender entered the quantum tier and immediately began experiencing system failures as dimensional energy overwhelmed its shielding. Johnson fought to maintain control as reality shifted around them in impossible ways. She could hear the voices of the trapped pilots calling out across the quantum void, and she knew they were close to finding them. Santos reached out with her scattered consciousness as the rescue ship approached her position in the dimensional fracture. She tried to warn Johnson about the dangers they were facing, but communication across quantum barriers was almost impossible. The rescue team would have to navigate by instinct and hope while reality itself tried to tear them apart. The biocomputers began to overload as the Defender pushed deeper into the quantum tier. Dr. Rodriguez monitored their progress from Earth, while preparing backup systems in case the primary rescue attempt failed. The modified Vorthak technology was holding, but it was being pushed beyond its design limits by the dimensional chaos. Johnson finally located Phillips and began the extraction process as alarms screamed throughout her ship. The quantum energies were fighting against the rescue attempt as if they wanted to keep the pilots trapped forever. She had to convince the tortured consciousness to let go of their protective instincts and trust her to guide them to safety. Time was running out, and the quantum tier was beginning to collapse around them. Commander Johnson reached out across the quantum void toward the fragmented consciousness of Lieutenant Colonel Phillips. His mind was scattered across multiple dimensions, but she could sense his core personality still fighting to protect humanity even in death. The biocomputer interface allowed her to communicate directly with his trapped consciousness, but convincing him to let go would be the hardest part of the rescue. Phillips experienced the contact as a warm light cutting through the endless darkness of his quantum prison. For months he had been reliving his final moments over and over again as dimensional energy tore through his neural patterns. The approach of the rescue ship felt like a miracle, but he was terrified of abandoning his post. Even in death, his duty to defend Earth consumed his every thought. Johnson showed Phillips images of the victory his sacrifice had achieved. The Vorthak fleet was gone, and Earth was safe from the alien threat. His mission had succeeded completely, and there was no need for him to continue suffering in the quantum realm. She could feel his resistance weakening as he began to understand that holding on was actually harming the people he had died to protect. Maria Santos was the next pilot Johnson contacted as the Defender pushed deeper into the dimensional fracture. Santos had been trapped in a loop of revenge and hatred that kept her consciousness anchored to the quantum tier. Johnson had to convince her that her family's death had been avenged and that continuing to fight would only cause more innocent people to suffer the same loss. The extraction process was incredibly difficult because each pilot had to willingly release their hold on the quantum energies. They had become so focused on their protective instincts that letting go felt like betrayal. Johnson used the modified Vorthak biotechnology to show them what was happening to the colonies as the quantum tiers expanded. Their continued existence in the dimensional fractures was destroying everything they had tried to save. Dr. Lee monitored the rescue from her laboratory as the biocomputers showed massive energy fluctuations. The quantum tiers were fighting against the extraction process as if they had developed a will of their own. Each time Johnson successfully contacted a trapped pilot, the dimensional chaos grew more violent. It was as if the tiers wanted to keep their prisoners and would destroy the rescue ship rather than let them go. Admiral Morrison coordinated the evacuation of the inner colonies as the quantum tiers continued their expansion toward Earth. The rescue mission was humanity's last hope, but it might already be too late. Long-range sensors showed that the dimensional fractures were accelerating and would reach the home system within days. If Johnson failed, then President Turner would have to implement the Vorthak solution and sacrifice millions of people. Phillips finally agreed to release his hold on the quantum energies after Johnson convinced him that his duty was complete. The extraction process began immediately as biomechanical tendrils reached into the dimensional fracture to pull his consciousness back to normal space. The quantum tier fought against the rescue, but Phillips added his own will to the effort and gradually broke free from his prison. The pilot's consciousness returned to the normal universe like a man emerging from a nightmare. His mind was damaged by months of quantum torture, but he was finally at peace. Johnson felt tears running down her face as she guided him toward the afterlife he had earned through his sacrifice. One by one, she began extracting the other members of Ghost Squadron from their dimensional prison. Santos was harder to convince because her anger had become part of the quantum structure itself. She had been feeding her rage into the tiers for so long that letting go felt like forgiving the aliens who had killed her family. Johnson had to show her that revenge was meaningless if it destroyed the very people she wanted to protect. Earth needed her to find peace so that humanity could survive. The extraction of each pilot caused the quantum tiers to shrink and stabilize. Dr. Rodriguez watched in amazement as his instruments detected the dimensional fractures beginning to heal themselves. The modified Vorthak technology was working exactly as predicted, and the wounds in space-time were slowly closing. Humanity would survive without requiring mass sacrifice. Jake Morrison was the last pilot Johnson contacted, and he was the most difficult to reach. His consciousness had become spread across multiple quantum tiers, and extracting him would require shutting down several dimensional fractures simultaneously. The process would push the biocomputers beyond their limits, but it was the only way to save him and complete the healing of space-time. The final extraction nearly destroyed the Defender. As massive energies tore through its hull, Johnson held on to Morrison's consciousness as reality came apart around them, and then suddenly everything went quiet. The quantum tiers had collapsed and sealed themselves as the last of the trapped pilots found peace. The rescue mission had succeeded, but at the cost of almost everything. Johnson had left The Defender limped back to normal space with its crew barely alive and its systems completely burned out. Johnson had saved the trapped pilots and sealed the quantum tears, but she would carry the scars of her journey through the dimensional fractures for the rest of her life. The rescue had required her to experience a small portion of what the pilots had endured, and the memory would never fade. Completely. Dr. Lee's modifications to the Vorthek technology had worked perfectly, and the space-time damage was healing naturally. The abandoned colonies could be resettled as soon as the dimensional radiation faded and humanity could begin rebuilding what they had lost. The victory against the aliens was finally complete, but it had cost far more than anyone had imagined possible. Admiral Morrison stood in the memorial hall on Luna, reading the names of the quantum pilots who had saved humanity twice. Their first sacrifice had defeated the Vorthek, but their second sacrifice had been even greater. They had chosen to endure months of torment rather than abandon their posts, and then found the courage to let go when holding on would have doomed their species. The memorial inscription was simple, but it captured the terrible cost of humanity's greatest victory. The pilots had died twice so that others might live, and their sacrifice would never be forgotten. The quantum weapons were banned, and their technology was buried in classified archives where it could never again tempt desperate leaders into using them. Humanity emerged from the crisis changed in fundamental ways. The colonies were rebuilt, but with new safeguards to prevent similar disasters. Dr. Rodriguez established the Institute for Ethical Warfare to ensure that future generations would remember the true cost of victory. The lesson was clear. Some weapons were too dangerous to use even when facing extinction. Earth itself had survived, but humanity had learned that winning was not always worth the price of victory. The quantum pilots had saved their species, but they had also shown that there were fates worse than death. In the end, the greatest victory had come not from destroying enemies, but from saving friends and finding the courage to let go when holding on would cause more harm than good.